The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's web seminar, a review of environmentally preferable purchasing and select experiences in the Midwest and beyond. This seminar is sponsored by the EPA's Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. My name is Chris Newman, and I'm from EPA's Region 5 office in Chicago, Illinois. I will be managing the technical aspects of today's webinar, as well as moderating it. While we wait for others to log in, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. By now, you should have the GoToWebinar application running and should see the welcome presentation on your screen. If you have technical difficulties using GoToWebinar, you can go to www.gotowebinar.com and click on Support and FAQs along the upper part of the page. Or on more compact web browsers, it may be appearing in the three-lined hamburger menu once you expand it. The presentations and slides will be advanced by the presenter. Note, a copy of the slides are also in your handout box, which is in the GoToWebinar control doc. We encourage you to ask questions today. Please use the GoToWebinar control panel and type your questions in the area that says Questions. Click Send to submit it to the moderator. Please type your questions throughout the presentation. After today's seminar, there will be a short evaluation. Please take a moment to fill it out. Your feedback is vital to help us provide the highest quality speakers and information to meet your needs. We'll take a brief pause right now to allow additional people to join into the webinar as they load the software. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining the August 13th, 2020 edition of the Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. We are happy to have you participating. This webinar is hosted by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to provide training and a networking opportunity to state and local governments, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders interested in sustainable materials management. Today's EPA-hosted webinar will present information on how we can help build markets for recovered materials and products with improved environmental performance using environmentally preferable purchasing policies. The information is presented by Dr. David Schonard, is from a report that he and his team created at the Michigan Tech University and their Great Lakes Environmental Infrastructure Center as part of a cooperative agreement between US EPA Region 5 and that university. It's been a real pleasure to work with Dr. Schonard during this project, as well as welcome EPA's SMM Web Academy's two experts in the field of environmentally preferable purchasing. I'd like to thank the panel for taking time from their busy schedules to prepare for and be with us today. I know with the ongoing COVID-19 situation that they are being pulled in many directions to support their state's efforts. For their detailed biographies, please check them out on the SMM Web Academy website. Now, a short bio of all of our presenters. Dr. David Schonard is professor and Richard and Bonnie Robbins Endowed Chair in Sustainable Use of Materials in the Department of Chemical Engineering at Michigan Technological University and director of the Sustainable Futures Institute. Melissa Peck is the Sustainable Procurement Program Coordinator for the state of Minnesota. And Mark Riston is a Senior Procurement Engineer for the state of California, working at the Department of General Services as the Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Supervisor. We'll be taking a few questions after the formal presentations. Please feel free to type questions throughout the webinar in the questions box in the GoToWebinar control doc. Moving into today's webinar, please note the disclaimer. And now to our speakers. Today's format will have a presentation from Dr. Schonard, We'll have 2 brief presentations from our purchasing experts, and then a moderated discussion led by Dr. Schonert with the panelists. At that time, we'll also be able to ask some questions from our audience. So without further ado, please welcome David Schonert, Melissa Peck, and Mark Riston. And with that, I will be turning presentation over to Dr. Schonert.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for that nice introduction. And I'll show my screen now. And hopefully you can see my first slide.
We see your editing view. We don't see the presenter view. The screen's.
All right, now I'll switch over and swap, and you should see my presenter view now.
There we go.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris, for that nice introduction. Before I make my remarks, I'd like to make a couple of quick points. First of all, as Chris mentioned, I am a chemical engineer, and this project that we recently completed was a policy-related project. So I don't consider myself an expert in policy. I'm a student of policy. I'm also a developer of chemical recycling technologies and with interest in commercialization. So I'm very interested to learn more about policy. And so that's one of the items I wanted to get out of the way. And the next is that this discussion that I'll present connects 2 ideas. One is environmentally preferable purchasing, and the other idea is recycling of plastics. So I will talk about both of those topics as I go through the slides. And so this is an outline. First, I'll provide a quick introduction to EPA's EPP program, followed by an introduction to plastics, plastic waste, and benefits of recycling plastic. Then discuss the objectives of this EPA R5 EPP project, summarize the study methods and key results, talk about future developments in chemical recycling very quickly to increase plastic recycling rates. And then we will proceed to our other guest presentations. And at the end, we will have a panel discussion with Q&A. All right, so quickly introducing EPA's Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Program. This is a program that really connects 3 main ideas. First of all, federal procurement, the private sector, and environmental standards and eco-labels. The EPP program helps federal procurement officials to identify and purchase products that prevent pollution and have lower life cycle costs. It also supports domestic manufacturing and U.S. industry competitiveness, and it assists purchasers to understand the many environmental standards and product eco-labels. And this slide provides some additional links and information about the EPA EPP program. The top link is to that program description, and the next 2 links really are involving support of that program through the Comprehensive Procurement Guideline Program and the recommendations of specifications, standards, and eco-label. And this bottom link really is focusing on recycling, and it's a recent initiative at EPA on increasing recycling across the nation. So if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to visit those links and learn more about those topics. So as I said, I will also talk about plastics. And so let me start with this diagram, which is called a Sankey diagram. And it relates the material flows of plastics and different plastic types. So this is cumulative data since the beginning of plastics production from about 1950 to the present. And the total amount of plastics that have been produced is 3.8 billion metric tons. And there are 2 main types of plastics production, non-fiber and fiber. Fiber plastics go into making textiles, whereas non-fiber go into making different material types as shown here. Polyethylene, PE, polypropylene, PP, polystyrene, PS, PVC is polyvinyl chloride, PET is polyethylene terephthalate, and PUR is polyurethane. These then are used in different consumption sectors, the most important of which is packaging. At about 39% of all plastic that has been produced has been used in packaging. And this is distinguished as having a very short lifetime in use. So almost immediately, these materials end up in the waste treatment system. The next most common sector of consumption is building and construction. And this has about 35 years of mean lifetime, average lifetime for plastics to be in use rather than ending up in the waste management infrastructure. And there are several other consumption sectors, as you can see here: transportation, electronics, and so forth. Eventually, these materials either go into in-use stock, especially for the long-lived materials like building and construction, but particularly for packaging, end up being in the waste treatment system, in which most of the plastic has been landfilled or leaked to the environment, almost 80%. The next most common end-of-life treatment is incineration. And this is global data as I'm describing this. And then a very small amount, about 9% of plastic that's ever been produced, has gone into recycling. Another interesting statistic is that about 4% of petroleum is used every year for feedstock production for plastics, and another 4% of petroleum is used for process energy, in addition to inputs of natural gas for plastics production. And on the end of life side, there's a significant amount that ends up as ocean debris, about 8 million tons per year. And this is primarily from developing world countries in Asia that receive our exports of waste plastic, and their infrastructure for handling that is not adequate to properly manage it. So switching to the US now, the graph on the right shows US plastic waste generation over time from 1960 to nearly the present. And currently about 35 million US short tons is generated every year. Due to the Chinese regulations to ban plastics with contamination levels above 0.5%, much of the exported recyclable plastic is now being landfilled because it doesn't have markets overseas. And so very small fraction, as shown in the blue line here, is actually recycled. And there's a slight downtick in the recent years, partly due to the Chinese ban on accepting exported waste plastic from the US and other developed countries like the European Union. And so this pie chart really shows what's happening at the end of life for waste plastics. About 76% is landfilled, 16% is combusted with energy recovery, and only about 8% is actually recycled, mostly through mechanical recycling. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, switching over to the European Union, the picture is quite different, especially for the countries in the EU within this red box. These are countries that have landfill bans. And so these countries recycle between 20 to over 40% of their waste plastic, the balance of which is incinerated for energy recovery. Now, the countries outside the landfill ban in the EU rely more and more on landfilling, shown by the red bars in this diagram. And over the decade from 2006 to 16, there was a total increase of total waste collected in the EU of 11%. However, there was a large increase in that waste going, plastic waste going to energy recovery, and even larger fraction going to recycling, and a smaller fraction, a reduced fraction, going to landfilling. So this landfill ban was very effective at increasing recycling all across the EU. Coming back to the US now, we see that the recycling rates for different types of plastics shown here, PET, HDPE, low-density polyethylene, and polypropylene, the recycling rates vary, with the highest recycling rates for PET and diminishing amounts for the polyethylene plastics and almost nothing for polypropylene. And finally, there are definitely benefits to recycling plastics. The statistics here come from the literature on environmental life cycle assessments, showing reduced consumption of natural resources, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions compared to virgin plastics. And so for PET, the recycled carbon footprint of recycled plastic is much lower, about 1/3 of virgin plastics, and similarly for high density polyethylene. If we look at the greenhouse gas savings for other materials that are recycled, we see very large savings of greenhouse gases, particularly for paper, aluminum, less so for glass and steel. So with that quick introduction on plastics and plastics recycling, let me turn now to the objectives of the EPP study. The first objective is really relevant to this presentation, and so it was to identify environmentally preferable purchasing policies, practices, and other opportunities to increase recovery of and reuse of plastic materials, such as polyethylene, with a focus on Region 5. The second objective related to end-of-life management for lithium batteries, and I won't be speaking more about that in this talk. So these objectives translated to these tasks. The first task was to identify recycling rates, policies, and programs, mainly in Region 5. The second task was to analyze EPP policies and programs and prepare for conducting an anonymous survey on identified policies, challenges, and best practices with no more than 9 selected purchasing professionals from states and city government, as well as private industry. So this survey would not be considered a scientific survey due to the small number of interviewees. And then the third task was based on the surveys, summarize the best practices and that procurement professionals use to purchase products with recycled content. The fourth task relates to the lithium batteries and won't be included. So the main results from task 1 are shown here in terms of the recycling rates in Region 5. The blue is all of the municipal solid waste materials that are recycled, the percentages: paper, steel, glass, aluminum, and plastics. And we can see that in the blue bar, there are 3 states that really are very high recycling rates: Minnesota, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And then the red bars represent the percent of plastic in municipal waste that is recycled. And all of these results are in single digits, much lower than other material recycling. But still, Minnesota, Illinois, and Wisconsin are at the top here. But it's really still very small recycle rates for plastics. Another task 1 outcome was a survey of Region 5 recycling policies and initiatives. And I won't go into the great detail. There's a large and broad range of these policies enacted in law and other kinds of initiatives and plans. There's a broad range of these policies and goals, yet there's also a good deal of overlap. And so our conclusion was that this suggests that some efforts to share experiences could be beneficial among the different states in Region 5 that may lead to more efforts to standardize recycling policies in the future. Now, the second task, we analyzed the literature and we had some main learning outcomes. And one of those were, what are the main characteristics of EPP policies? So these are what we came away with, the main characteristics. First of all, to minimize the use of packaging in the products that can be purchased. Secondly, to use recyclable or recycled materials in packaging. Thirdly, to have more efficient use of energy and water in products and services. Fourth, to use no or fewer toxic chemicals or materials in the products that are being purchased. Fifthly, less greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with those products from a life cycle or a full cost accounting point of view. products derived from renewable energy and materials, and products that otherwise offer environmental, economic, or social benefits. And then similarly, some of the outcomes on challenges in implementing EPP are these, that they are decentralized purchasing systems by federal and state governments. In other words, different agencies in state and federal governments having different EPP policies. Difficulty in estimating the life cycle costs and or environmental impacts of products. Tracking environmentally preferable products, in other words, having a list or available list of these EPP products. Finding new suppliers to procure such products from. Shifting from a business as usual to a more EPP-oriented scenario. And then the dangers of avoiding greenwashing claims. Many of those links I presented on the second slide address many of these challenges. So I want to just have you go back to slide 4 and revisit those links because they do overcome many of these challenges. So now moving on to task 3 and the survey. The survey was conducted in Region 5 states and some states in Region 9 and a private company. The Region 5 states include, as you saw before, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Indiana. And the states in Region 9 that participated include California and Arizona, and particularly the city of Phoenix in Arizona. The survey was conducted via email, which included a Word document with the questions attached to the email. This allowed the participants to become familiar with the questions. And then once they were ready, they could link to a Google form and submit their responses. Those were compiled and summarized as part of our research. And in all of this, we maintained anonymity in terms of the identity of the interviewees. Now, these are the main survey questions by category. And so the first 3 questions deal with EPP policies. The next 3 on specific EPP policies related to plastic. The second 3 were EPP goals and targets, and then the third grouping of 3 was the plastic-specific policies. The next 2 relate to lithium batteries, which I'll skip. The next 2 are evaluating effectiveness of the programs and challenges of the programs. Number 14, considered environmental performance in purchasing decisions and how much that is weighted. The next is implementing best practices in EPP. The next 2 were deciding and prioritizing EPP policies based on standards, labels, eco-labels, and certifications. And then a final question on overcoming challenges in EPP. Now, these 18 questions in total, 3 multiple choice questions and 15 requiring a narrative answer. So the next 3 slides will relate to the multiple choice questions. The first one related to EPP policies. And the largest number of responses were with regard to targeting for % purchases of environmentally preferable products and services. That was equal to the responses on considering life cycle costs of products or total cost of ownership in the purchasing decision. The 2 next most common responses were having lists of all green suppliers to purchase from and lists of all green products to purchase. And only 1 state, Illinois, indicated as part of their policy a price preference for environmentally preferable products. In other words, having a 10 or 20% price preference for those types of products versus non-EPP products. The next multiple choice was a question related to EPP goals, and the most common answer was the goal is to lower environmental impacts through purchasing. The 2 next most common responses were to encourage and sustain markets for products made from recycled materials and to reduce adverse impacts on health, social conditions, and the environment. And the next most common response was to support businesses owned by underrepresented groups. There were no responses to the question about encouraging local or domestic production of goods and services. The third multiple choice question related to the weighting of environmental performance relative to other considerations in purchasing decisions. And the most common response was that environmental performance is weighted less than cost and function. However, other comments related to how important lowering environmental impacts were for environmentally preferable purchasing decisions. And so we interpreted this as a win-win-win situation rather than a binary choice of environment or cost and function. The next three slides relate to the other major findings. And so the first is EPP policies are often linked to other policies and programs. For example, in the state of California, their EPP policy is linked to various legislations mandating GHG reductions and the purchase of products with recycled content. In Minnesota, EPP policy is linked to executive order. And in the city of Phoenix, the EPP policies were strictly voluntary. Now, with relating to EPP training questions, there was a wide range in responses. About half of the respondents stated that there are either no training programs or they are being developed, while the remainder indicated that procurement personnel have access to either in-house training programs or training provided by outside organizations. In terms of identifying EPP products, many respondents indicated that they use accepted guidelines, such as the EPA CPG program or the private sector Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. In terms of standards and eco-labels, again, I'm showing the link here. That was identified as one method to identify these products. While others indicated third-party certification to verify emissions reductions, still others stated a reliance on vendor self-certification, and others indicated that no guidelines, eco-labels, or standards are currently used to identify products. What changes to EP policy were recommended to make them better? Again, a wide range were provided, requiring that all state purchasing be through EPP contracts, mandating purchasing of products with recycled content, plastic content, emphasizing vendor reporting on purchasing decisions, improving enforcement of EPP policies, setting mandatory targets for purchases of products with recycled content, and then hiring a full-time person to implement mandatory EPP programs. So that's the major outcomes from the study. And before going on, I'd like to acknowledge some of the students that helped in this study and in this presentation. Pratyusha Sridhara, an MS candidate at Michigan Tech. Utkarsh Chowdhury, a PhD candidate in chemical engineering, and Dr. Ulysses Gracida Alvarez, a postdoctoral researcher in my institute, but now currently a postdoc at Argonne National Lab in the Chicago area. And before passing the baton, I'd like one final thought on increasing plastics recycle. Mechanical recycling is currently the main way that plastics become recycled. However, mechanical recycling has limitations stemming from contamination such as additives and pigments within the recycled plastic. Mechanical recycling ends up with lower mechanical strength for the recycled resin compared to virgin resin, and this requires a mixing, a blending of mechanical resin with virgin resin. This limits the amount of recycling that can actually occur, the percent of recycling that can occur. However, chemical recycling has advantages to overcome these limitations. Chemical recycling can yield virgin quality resin that can enable closed loop recycling. And there are many processing options such as conversion, decomposition, and purification, which then can enter the production chain at different locations from the start to the finish of plastics production. And so I'd encourage the listeners to access the link below to learn more about chemical recycling process technologies from the closed loop recycling group. And so with that, thank you very much for your attention. And I would like to point out one more link, why the world has a plastic waste problem and how to fix it. This is a very good short 15-minute documentary I think you'll find very interesting. However, they don't mention anything about plastic recycling. So I'm a little disappointed in that, but nonetheless, a very good video for learning about plastic challenges.
Okay.
Okay, Chris?
Yes, thank you, David. I'm now going to turn the presenter role over to Melissa Peck.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. Great presentation, David. I hadn't been able to see the full results, so that is very interesting to see. We are going to shift gears a little bit here. I'm going to give a more general overview of sustainable purchasing at the state of Minnesota and what our program looks like, what the evolution has been, and then we will have time for questions at the end of all of our presentations, I believe. So if you have any specific questions about day-to-day purchasing at the state of Minnesota in our program, then I'd be happy to answer them at that point. So I'm not seeing the switch over yet.
Right, we do see your screen. I think you just need to push F5 and you should be good to go.
Gotcha. Alrighty then. Okay. So to begin with, the history.
Melissa, can you push the slide screen?
You're not seeing the presenter mode yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. How about now?
No, not yet.
Okay, let's.
If you go to slideshow.
Yeah, I'm in the slideshow mode right now.
Oh, okay. Why don't you may be showing the you may have selected GoToWebinar to show a particular web page or program, and we just may need to do that. So under showing screen, there might be a drop down that'll give you some additional options.
So Melissa, go out of your show mode in PowerPoint, and then you can access the GoToWebinar.
So, pardon my ignorance, where's the show mode? I'm not, because I didn't even click on show your screen, so.
Oh, okay. So you should be able to go to webinar and get that GoToWebinar screen up, and there should be a little dialog box there for you to show your screen.
Nope. I'm not seeing that.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
Why don't we have you guys present it?
Okay.
If that's all right.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Chris,
not sure what's happening there. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
No problem. Let me.
Muted.
All right, so just, I'm apparently not seeing everything. I still see David's screen, so just let me know when you have it up.
Unmuted.
Okay, do you see my screen now?
I see the Our Speaker slide, yes.
Okay, great.
Wonderful, and we can start on the second slide.
Okay, great. Thank you for your patience.
All right. Now we're cooking. Okay, so the state of Minnesota's idea of sustainable purchasing really started in the late 1990s. It was focused largely on recycled content purchasing, and it has always been a partnership between the Department of Administration and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. But back then, the program was really unstructured, the partnership was informal, and we really viewed sustainable purchasing how you see it on this slide. So the mindset at the time was that environmental, social, and economic interests were all important, but they were all mutually exclusive, and we had to choose one over the other. Next slide, please. So today, the program has really advanced in both its structure and its ideology. We view the program much more holistically, which has contributed greatly to the program's acceptance and success. So there's now a view of these being much more like they are shown here, where there's shared viewpoints, not competing interests. And this has been really helpful because the previous thinking of these being competing interests that are mutually exclusive sometimes put the offices at odds, which wasn't great for the partnership. And we really saw progress accelerate once it was formally recognized that all of these interests are intertwined and necessary for a successful program. So for instance, just a couple of examples, we know that environmentally preferable purchasing positively impacts social interests. So for example, communities of color are exposed to more air pollution than their white, non-Hispanic counterparts. And we know conversely that promoting social interests positively impacts economic interests, inclusion of more organizations, including those that are owned by more minority and targeted group vendors, increases competition, which is beneficial for buyers. So the genesis of the program in its current form was an EPA grant in 2013. And this grant funded a spend analysis project that resulted in priority contract area identification. This spend analysis also coincided with our connection of this with the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which David mentioned. The state of Minnesota was a founding member of that, and we were there when they developed the guidance, which we really relied on to develop our policy. And as I mentioned, the offices were at odds before this. So really a key ingredient that helped us push our program and policy forward was the strengthening of the relationships between key stakeholders, namely leadership and staff, between the Department of Administration and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Next slide, please. And on this next slide, you're going to see an example of part of our spend analysis, which I mentioned was a key part of our program evolution. It came from that EPA grant. And this really allowed us to prioritize product categories and specifically identify state contracts that we wanted to consider for the inclusion of sustainability measures. So as you can see, our highest impact area there at the top with all the number ones all the way across the row, that's computer and electronic product manufacturing. So IT has been a key focus area for us. If you go a little bit further down, a lot of them are chemical heavy contracts, and those have been focus areas for us as well. So this was one of the first steps in helping us strategize, and it was the beginning of the means for us to begin the loose structure of our program. So that was really the impetus to help us build momentum and structure the foundation that we built and continue to build on. Next slide, please. So using some of that momentum, the Department of Administration and the Pollution Control Agency worked together to formulate a shared vision and mission that captured our intentions for the future. And we carefully crafted the vision and mission that you see here so that it captured our desire to be intentional, strategic, and holistic. And we opted to develop what we call our charter, so that's our policy, and an accompanying framework to codify our program. So the charter is intended to be more of a high-level document that's signed by leadership, and it supports a number of our state executive orders. And then the framework is the more detailed document that we're more easily able to expand or edit as our program evolves. Next slide, please. As I've already briefly mentioned, there were significant benefits to making that change from an informal program to something more formalized, and you see those here. It really provided the basis for more cross-functional collaboration, as opposed to being siloed as we were before, just focusing on either economic benefits or environmental benefits. It allowed us to strategize and focus on the highest impact areas to maximize the effectiveness of our time spent and of our impacts. And it also allowed us to better track those impacts to show the benefits of our programs, as opposed to really just anecdotal evidence that we could provide. Next slide, please. So in our charter, I mentioned that we have a number of executive orders that we reference back to. And through this, there are a number of different metrics that we measure, which you'll see on the next slide. But this is our key goal. And this comes from another state of Minnesota office, the Office of Enterprise Sustainability. And this is enshrined in the executive order which was originally 1712 and has been renewed by our current governor. And that is that by 2025, sustainable purchases comprise 25% of the state's total spend on contracts that are in priority contract categories. And those are the categories that we chose based on the spend analysis, which you can see here below, including IT hardware, indoor building materials, furnishings, office supplies, etc. Next slide, please. Here are some of those benefits that, that I mentioned that we track. As of fiscal year 18, we were at, or excuse me, fiscal year 19, this is showing, we were at 21.1% sustainable spend of our 25% goal, so woo. That was pretty exciting. We're at 8.2% of our 10% social sustainability goal, which is that 10% of that will be with certified minority, women, economically disadvantaged, and veteran-owned businesses. And then we have some more tangible and specific benefits that we're able to speak to as far as metric tons of CO2 equivalents, gallons of water saved, megawatt hours saved, lifetime costs, etc. And we got these through online calculators, specifically paper calculators and the EP calculator, which calculates our IT savings from our more sustainable purchases. So this is likely a significant underestimate of what our actual impacts are. So either way, pretty exciting to see this. Next slide, please. And I just want to end my presentation today by providing you with a few next steps to take if you're interested in potentially developing a program such as this one. And that is really that you prioritize. So look at your organization's spend, do a life cycle analysis if you can, and try to spend your time where it's going to have impact. Save time by leveraging existing resources to help you design your process. As I mentioned, the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council's guidance is a great resource. It helps you to stay focused, use what's available, just don't reinvent the wheel. There's a ton out there already. To make the best case for your program, connect it to existing policies, internal partners, and programs. Really anchoring it to what is already existing and going along helps you pick up on that momentum. Begin measuring any impacts you can as soon as possible, because measurement is really going to help you build the case. As you saw on the last slide, you can turn those measurements into stories, and that is going to really resonate with a wider audience and help them see the importance of purchasing more sustainably. It's great if you're able to get a dedicated project manager. It provides some infrastructure and allows things to keep moving, and it provides some accountability. Obviously, that's not always possible. And likewise, leadership level commitment is awesome. If you can get an executive order or policy, or clamp on to an existing executive order or policy, that's always beneficial. C-suite commitment is invaluable in helping you keep the program moving and pushing through potential hurdles, so be ready to make the case to them. And the last slide, please. So I want to thank you for your time and attention today. My email address is here if you have any other questions that we're not able to address today. And I would encourage you to check out our website, which is linked to here. We have some great resources available there, including our full spend analysis and some additional information about more specific product categories if you're interested. So check it out. And with that, I think we are on to the next presenter.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. We are going to turn it over to Mark now. And I just want to remind everyone to please submit any questions that you have at this point. We are keeping track of those, and we'll answer questions as we're able to as the panel discussion goes on. Mark, you should have presenter. We see your screen and we're ready to go. Thank you.
All right, thank you. My name is Mark Riston. I'm going to go through California's environmentally preferable purchasing program and hopefully give you some ideas where you can go with your program. A little background. So in 2003, Assembly Bill 498 came up. We call it the EPP Act. Basically, it put into public contract code a few requirements for the Department of General Services where I work. These are kind of paraphrased from the law, but promote EPP, implement a strategy, develop and implement a strategy to increase EPP, coordinate with other states and federal agencies, create training programs to instill the importance, and develop an EPP best practices manual. So the first job that we had was to define what EPP was. There was a lot of questions out there as, does this count and does that count? And so we put together a list here. The ones that are kind of in blue here are ones I have a separate slide for, and I'll explain, but we really wanted to define it very clearly for all of the buyers out there. So the first is acquire something through a leverage procurement agreement, and it's identified as an EPP commodity or contract. The next is to use a DGS purchasing standard. The next one is the state agency buy recycled campaign. We call it SABRAC, and make sure that the product that we're buying is compliant to those requirements. Meet third-party environmental certification, and I have another slide for that. The last two are a little less common for us. So a take-back program, we buy a product, they take the old product that it's replacing back, and instead of them throwing it into a landfill, they have to do something with it for it to count. And then we do have executive orders and management memos and policy letters that come out that say, you know, you need to buy certain things that are EPP. And those are a little less frequent. So I don't have enough time to go through those. So we'll go through the first four. The EPP contracts are definitely our favorite and our agency's favorite. We go through and create statewide contracts at DGS, and most of these are mandatory for state agencies to use, and then they're also typically available for smaller government agencies. Cities and counties can buy off of our contracts. So what happens is during the process, we have a team of DGS EPP engineers, and they do a lot of research in the marketplace, and they come up with recommendations for EPP language that can be added to contracts. When we have a contract that has EPP language identified, it helps our users guide their purchasing decisions. So we really want them to buy this rather than that. And DGS publishes that statewide contracts index list. The link is here. And there's a column in there for EPP, so you can go right to it and know that you're buying something that's EPP. We feel that this is the most hands-on we are with contracts and purchasing of EPP. And so we like this, and it makes it very easy for our end users. The next is purchasing standards. So when a contract or when purchasing is not high enough, either in quantity or dollar value, that we don't need a contract, we create purchasing standards. And these purchasing standards are used by the agencies under their delegated authority to purchase. And so they can pull those documents off of our website. They can grab those EPP requirements, and then they can make sure that their purchase meets EPP requirements as we've defined them. The next, this one's a big one, SABRAC. So it started in 1989. There are 11 product categories. David will be happy to know that plastics is one of those categories, but this is the list. I won't read it for you, but they're there. Basically, all state agencies have to report to CalRecycle by October 31st of each year what they purchased, and there's defined goals, and there's reports, and all of those things are usually available to the general public. The fourth one that I wanted to talk about is environmental certifications, and David mentioned it, and I think Melissa also mentioned it, but it can be difficult to find products that are EPP. You read sales brochures, marketing literature, there's a lot of greenwashing and things out there that make it difficult to know that what you're buying really is EPP. So we identified third-party environmental certifications, and we list them on our website, and we have certain categories. I won't go to all of these categories, but you know, computers are a big one, and electronic equipment, paper products, and paint. And so you can go down that matrix and find the third-party certification that would prove that the product that you're purchasing meets EPP requirements. Another thing that we do at DGS, and you know, it was listed on public contract code that we had to have training, and we did in-person training for a very long time. yeah, last year we started working on online self-paced EPP training. So it really worked out well with everybody teleworking these days. So right now we have our basic training, which I think that there's some very useful information in there for anyone, but there is also some very specific California requirements, and here's how you do this for California. But that training is available currently, and by the end of the year, we're planning on having one for supervisors and executives. So we've really tried to tailor the training to the audience. And as an example, the executive training is heavy on policy. We want smaller agencies to go out and come up with an EPP policy of their own. That training is listed on our website, and you know, if you're in California, certainly you can take it. I believe it's available pretty much for anybody who wants to take it, so I recommend that. I've got a list of resources here just at the end if you want to you know, click on any of these things. You know, California is big in geography, big in population, and so Cal Recycle is another agency that we partner with, and they have all kinds of great information on recycling, different programs and things like that. So beyond going to the DGS website and starting there and looking for the information that might help you set up your own program, I also would recommend visiting Cal Recycle. They have a lot of great information. So with that, I will turn it back over.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And now I'm going to turn it over to David for the panel discussion.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, David.
Great. All right. Show my screen. Chris, did you receive the questions that all of the panelists sent in?
Yes. Let me pull those up. One moment.
Why don't we start with that?
Oh, okay.
Go
ahead.
Do you want to show your screen then if
Yes.
you have those questions? Okay.
Yes.
So first of all, I want to thank Chris and Christina at EPA for organizing the presentation, and of course all of our attendees who are still here with us. And this part of the program is intended to, you know, answer any questions that the attendees might have with regard to any of the presentations. So please, as Chris mentioned, if you can enter those questions into the question section of the webinar control panel,
And David,
we will look to those.
Okay, and you should see the questions to start off the conversation there on the screen.
Right. So I'll start with a question for Mark. What are the goals of your recycling program, i.e. do you set minimum requirements?
So yes, we do set minimum requirements. The SABREC program that I talked about, we just came up with a new requirement for 2020. So on or after January 1st, 2020, the law requires that we ensure that at least 75% of the total purchases under the reportable categories contain recycled content. There's a couple exceptions: paint, antifreeze, tires, they stayed at 50%. But if you purchased something out of those categories, the requirement is that at least 75% of those total purchases meet this requirement. And since this is brand new, we will find out in October when everybody submits all of their reports how close everybody got to that new lofty goal. So all of that will be available on the Cal Recycle website.
Great, thank you. Next question for Melissa. What other categories are you able to require more sustainable products for, and what does that look like?
Sure. So we have been, as I mentioned during my presentation, specifically focusing on high impact categories and looking at how we can require more sustainable products for those categories. And the ones that we found where there's really market supply and availability are office supplies. So we require copy paper, or excuse me, remanufactured toner, I guess, is what we would include under office supplies. We do require that for monochromatic toner. Recycled content paper, we require, actually as part of an executive order, that public entities purchase at least 30% recycled content in their copy paper. We have requirements for more sustainable computers and IT equipment. As Mark mentioned, it's kind of hard to say like, okay, what's more sustainable if you're a buyer? So we use EPA currently as our third-party certification requirement. Same with multifunctional devices. We have cleaning supplies that we require more sustainable products for. Furniture, there are 5 really toxic compounds that are commonly found in furniture that we require not be included in the furniture that we purchase. And the same with like carpet and flooring. There are just some nasty chemicals in there that we say can't be.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. I'm curating some of the questions that have been posted. Chris, did you want me to go to those, or?
Yes, David, I've gone through and flagged those, so you can take a look and select which ones you'd like to pose to our speakers.
I'm a little new to this. Oh, okay, this is a little bit more helpful. Just expanded my screen a little bit. Chris, I'm having a little bit of problem identifying your flagged ones.
Oh,
so if you wouldn't mind,
yes,
could you ask the questions?
Yes, I'll put a question out. I think this might be good for both of our speakers, maybe a little bit more depth. One of the questions is the person is curious about what kind of monitoring. For example, California has some reports, he realizes, but what kind of monitoring is done on the contracts, and then what kind of follow-up or ramifications are in place to ensure agencies meet their requirements?
Do you want to go first, Mark, or shall I?
Ladies first.
All righty. Such a gentleman. So at the state of Minnesota, we require reporting for contracts on which we have more sustainable requirements. And those reports come through our Office of State Procurement to me annually. And I have the wonderful task of going kind of line by line and looking at all the purchases and seeing whether or not there are more sustainable purchases that meet the requirements that we have in the contract. If there are agencies that are purchasing products that don't meet the requirements somehow, it's actually pretty difficult, I think, to do that in a lot of the contracts, because so for like our IT products, for instance, only more sustainable products are allowed to be offered on contract. So that one's pretty easy. But currently with our paper contract, there is virgin paper available. So if an agency buys virgin paper, then we'll just do some communication and outreach and say like, hey, was this an accidental purchase, which it usually was, or do you think that you had a valid reason to purchase this? In which case we kind of talk them through what that was. But yeah, we do monitoring annually and outreach around any purchases that go outside of the parameters that we're hoping to see.
Yeah, California is similar. We what you just said about computer servers, monitors, is we almost limit them to only one choice, and so trying very hard, they meet their goals. One of the things that is on my slide deck that I didn't have a chance to talk about is the Green Buyer website. So there's a link there. What that is we basically try and grab all of the data across the state, which is really a monumental task considering how big the state is and how much purchasing we do. But we post on that website charts for as many departments as we can, and the chart will show EPP purchased versus their non-EPP purchase. items. And so that is always available to the public. And then reports are available, and Cal Recycle will go back to some of these, they meet their goals, and they'll work with them. And as far as the Green Buyer website that we have, that data is up, and typically the agencies go on there and they look, and they get kind of upset that their chart doesn't look as good as they had hoped it would. And so we always hope in California, by shining a light on something, that we will enact kind of some action towards improving that. And so that Green Buyer information is on there. And we do get a lot of requests, and sometimes it's just an error in data, and it's an easy, great fix. And other times they really want some more help on how they can do better. And so that's what my team is there to help those folks and guide them where we can.
Hey, great. Hey, this is David. Here's a question that's about plastic, so I'm going to ask it. So what types of plastic products do you find that are on the environmentally preferable purchasing list? And either Melissa or Mark can take that question, or both.
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, what types of plastic products do you find on the EPP list?
Okay,
Like,
so
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, what kinds of plastics would normally be purchased as in a priority contract or some other contract?
Sure. So one of the main contracts that comes to mind is garbage bags. So the state of Minnesota has a program where I guess I shouldn't say the state of Minnesota. It's facilitated through counties, and counties are able to recycle their agricultural plastics, and companies use that to create garbage bags. And those garbage bags are sold on state contracts to state agencies and also to cities, counties, and other local units of government. And they're indicated on our contract release as the more sustainable option. So that's one that comes to mind. I think there's probably also recycled content in reman toners, toner cartridges, but it's probably more of a reuse thing at that point. Mark?
Great, thank you. Mark, do you have any?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of things, and Melissa's popping them all into my head, but we also have plastic bags, and we set up specific contracts for those. Remanufactured toner cartridges were a very big part of the plastic recycling portion of what we did. We've kind of recently run into some trouble with that, in that there aren't very many of those cartridges available anymore. So we are getting kind of reused plastics. It's difficult with California because Cal Recycle is such a big part of this. And so I have to focus on the procurement portion, which I think is kind of where Melissa is headed as well. But there are so many programs that Cal Recycle is running on what to do with those plastics, either just from the average citizen to what is going on with specific agencies. So where we can, we do look at plastics, and if we can add recycled material into any of those contracts, we do. It's just very difficult because sometimes the industry is slow to react, and so we're kind of at their disposal. We like to think in California that we're this big gorilla that can make the world bend to our will, but there's a lot of companies that are very big, and it's hard to push that forward. And so we try our best, but yeah, the contracts that come to mind for me would be plastic bags and toner cartridges, and beyond that, we don't have a ton of items on there relating to plastics.
Okay, great, thank you. Chris, let me hand it back to you if you have any questions you flagged.
Yes, we did get some additional questions, and I hope it would be possible for our speakers to all stay on for a few more minutes, as we did get another few more questions to talk about.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, great, thank you. This one was asked to Mark, but I'm going to ask it to both Mark and Melissa, regarding vendor self-certifications, what avenues do agencies have to ensure they're getting accurate information from the vendors?
Would you like me to go first this time?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure.
Okay. Self-certification is very difficult for us, no matter what it is, mostly because it's very hard to validate, right? So we always try and go to a third party. And that's true for technical information. It's true for EPP. It's kind of true for everything that, at some point you have to take a vendor's word for it. But when it comes to EPP, we really try and focus on those third-party certifications, and we try and validate all of those things. So we don't have a lot of EPP self-certification going on, just because we found that it was kind of ripe with error. We get bidders that, they just want to sell a widget, and they're willing to, fill out some paperwork and send it to us. And we haven't found that information is as accurate as we had always hoped it would be. So we're heavily reliant on third-party certifications in California.
And I would just repeat that. We really only require third-party certifications. The only way that they can certify themselves is if they are a targeted group, economically disadvantaged or veteran-owned business. And in that case, that's obviously towards the social sustainability side of things. And that is certified through the Department of Administration. So that's even kind of third-party certification. They just submit the materials and the department validates it. But everything else is third-party certification outside of the state.
So just a quick follow-up on that. Assuming you're a vendor and you'd like to sell through the EPP programs, either in California or Minnesota, how do you identify those third-party certifiers? Can they simply contact the state of Minnesota or California to find out how to do that?
They can. So for us, they can just reach out to the acquisition management specialist who's listed on the solicitation, and they will provide that information, or they'll contact me to provide that information.
Yeah, and in most cases in California, we're always hopeful that we have put that information in the solicitation right up front. Here it is. Here's where you go. Here's how you do it. And we have the same thing with a buyer, that if there's questions, they can ask those questions. And so the other point that I would bring up is that anything I'm recommending to our agencies or any of the people that are listening on our website is also available to vendors. And so if they are interested, they can download our third-party certification matrix. They can look at the commodity that they are currently making and see who the third party is that would certify that product and get their product certified. So that's always available, whether there's a solicitation going or not. So they can always do that.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Chris, are there any other questions that
Yes.
you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got another one here. This one was aimed at Melissa, but I'm going to broaden it just a little bit. This one was about those environmental impact matrices and assessments being available to local units of government so that they can focus their efforts. But let me broaden it a little bit. And is it possible for local units of government in your states to be able to either use the information you've generated for making purchasing decisions, or are they able to buy off of contracts that local governments would have access to? So kind of a two-part question there.
Sure. So yes to both. The spend analysis that we did, we think should be fairly indicative of governmental spending. We spend a lot of money on janitorial supplies because we have buildings, and maybe they spend less on that, but everybody spends a lot on IT, right? So that's going to be one of the priority areas. So we think that, modeling your sustainable purchasing program after that is probably a great start. We do have workshops for them as well to help them do their own spend analysis if they're interested in doing that, so they can identify their specific hotspots and where they should focus their efforts. And alternatively, if they just can't do either of those things, they are able to purchase off of our state contracts through our cooperative purchasing venture membership, where they essentially apply with the state and they just create a membership. It's pretty simple. And then they're able to go into our portal and look at our contract releases. They're, usually pretty aware of what the sustainable contracts are and which ones are not. And if they're not, then we have a button right there on the contract release page that says 100% sustainable contracts that they can click, and it will take them to a list. So it's pretty easy for them, I think. Or we try to make it easy for them, I should say.
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit in our my presentation, is that we do have a statewide contracts list. It identifies EPP. Almost all of those are available to local. We definitely open it up to California. The hard part is opening it up to the entire country, in that a lot of the suppliers that we have, sometimes shipping or service is a big heavy part of that contract, and they build that into a price, and they're thinking that they're going to be delivering this product to Los Angeles. And if we get somebody from Miami that wants to jump onto our contract, well, that's a whole different thing. So we don't typically have a lot of our state contracts available outside the state of California. And I would just say that we are a member of NASPO, the North, what does that stand for? Hold on. The National Association of State Procurement Officials. You get so used to saying the acronym that it stands for. So we are a member of NASPO, and we do coordinate contracts with other states where it works. And then I know Melissa has mentioned SPLC. That is also a great resource. They have so many things there, and they've been helpful with us in California doing spend analysis and all those things. And so if I can help and somebody wants to ask some specific questions about things that we have, I'm happy to share whatever I can, because you shouldn't recreate the wheel. And so, contact us, and everything I can possibly share with anybody, I'm happy to. And SPLC, yeah, they are a very good organization, and they've been very helpful for us as well.
Okay, great. One last question. This one, it kind of flips the purchasing side of it around, looking more at the perspective of the seller. The question is, do you have any advice for businesses making EPP decisions on packaging for products? And I just want to expand that towards any businesses that are looking to sell products that have environmentally preferable aspects. How could they market, or anything in particular, or advice that you would have for them?
You want to take it first, Mark?
Sure. We have a website. You can go there and you can click on it, and you can send us an email, and if we can help you, we will. The problem that we end up kind of running into at DGS is, as a purchasing entity, we oversee a lot of things at the state, but we don't necessarily decide on our own what we should and shouldn't make a contract for. It's usually pushed through by agencies. So if the Department of Transportation needs a very specific thing, they'll make a request to us to make a statewide contract out of that. So I don't think the DGS is necessarily the best place to shop your product, but you can let us know what you have, and we'll reach out to those agencies that we think might use it. And if there's enough of an interest, it could get some traction, and we could do a statewide contract, or those smaller agencies might make some smaller purchases directly. So we can always help guide you to the right people that might be interested in those products. But we don't typically put on a statewide contract for something that we don't have much demand for. And so a lot of the EPP products are kind of new emerging technologies. The packaging for a certain product is new. we're very interested in knowing about these things, but it doesn't necessarily think that if we think it's a great idea, we're going to be able to just put it on a contract. We really have to go out to the agencies and say, if you're interested, let us know, and then we put something together.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Mark just said. We have a website as well, and we make it clear that there are contacts that they can reach out to discuss the potential for including their products on state contract. The Office of State Procurement is always open to that, and I know that we have taken in a couple of ideas for innovative products and shopped them around to some agencies. Some of them have gained traction, some of them have not. Some of them we've said, it might be best if you go to a vendor and see if they can include it in their catalog. Just because if it's a niche item, it's going to be more difficult to get it into a contract. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't have anything else to add. I think that pretty much covers it.
So one more thing, I was just reminded by one of my guys on my team that we do have on Cal eProcure, which is our statewide purchasing program, a section that's called Sell to the State. So if you're interested in selling to the state, there's a way of getting logged in there. You can highlight the commodities that you're interested in. When those solicitations do come up, it notifies you. So Cal eProcure is one of the best places to do that, and look for Sell to the State. Thanks, Ian.
That's a great point, and I will echo that as well. Just check out the state of Minnesota's Office of State Procurement website, and you can find a similar link to Sell to the State. Thanks, Mark and Ian.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I kind of looking at the clock here. We are starting to run a little bit longer. David, do you have any other questions before I wrap up, or any other comments?
Yeah, just one comment, and that is we didn't get a chance to go to all the questions, and I wonder, will there be an opportunity for the panelists to respond to those questions and have them available to the attendees at some later point?
Yes, I think we can talk about that after the webinar. We do have a way that we can get email addresses and send those out individually.
Or if there's a way to post Q&A on the webinar site, something like that. Okay, I just wanted to ask and to address all the questions that were that did come in.
Yep, certainly. Okay. So with that, thank you, and we wish to thank all of today's speakers for their insights and their experiences with environmentally preferable purchasing. Finally, most of all, we thank you, our audience, for joining this SMM Web Academy, and hope you continue to join us. It is you that this program is designed for, so make sure you complete our evaluation and give us feedback on how we can meet your needs. We will post the webinar audio in about 2 weeks and the slides next week to our SMM webinar webpage. Please join us for the next webinar on September 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the SMM Web Academy webinar, New International Requirements for Export and Imports of Plastics Recyclables. Look for the registration link on our SMM webinar webpage in the coming weeks, and that is epa.gov/SMM. Again, epa.gov/SMM. So with that, I'd like to thank our speakers again, and that concludes today's session. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, Chris.